I shouldn't be getting Social Security. I make enough money. Why am I getting Social Security?
This should be a prime moment for millennials to be building wealth. They're just blocked in a lot of ways. I think it's really hard to maneuver, and these things, they compound over time.
We're very supply constrained in the US. We don't build a lot of housing, and so younger people are really facing that uphill battle. And then for older people, they're locked in. It's too expensive to sell out of their house.
This is Open to Debate. I'm Nick Gillespie, and today we're doing something a little bit different. We have gathered three different, distinct generations, a boomer, a zoomer, and a Gen Xer, to see where some of the dividing lines fall in today's discussions of politics, culture, economics, things like that. This conversation is part of a new series on generational divides, and it's made possible by a generous grant from the Liberty Ears Foundation. The topic up for discussion today is one of the most critical tethers between generations, one that gets a lot of play on things like TikTok, with younger generations raging at older ones, okay, boomer and all of that. I am talking here about money, the thing that creates wealth, social mobility, inheritance. Unlike the usual Open to Debate three-act arguments, this will be more of a conversation that digs into where the disagreements are between our three panelists and the generations that they represent. So let's meet them. First, I'm going to introduce Stacey Vanek Smith, right here. She's our Gen Xer. She's a journalist and reporter who covers business and the economy. She's currently a columnist for Bloomberg Business Week, where she also co-hosts the podcast Everybody's Business from Bloomberg Business Week. You might also hear her on NPR's Marketplace. As a member of Gen X, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Next, I'm going to welcome Joe Nocera over there on the end. Joe is also in the journalism business. He was a longtime columnist for the New York Times, where he spent years covering and writing about business. These days, he is the deputy managing editor at the Free Press. Joe, you are here as yourself, but also as a baby boomer. So thank you for joining us.
Myself is a baby boomer, so yes.
There you go. And then finally, I want to welcome Kyla Scanlon, who's in the middle. Kyla is an economist. She has a popular Substack called Kyla's Newsletter. She is known for her TikToks demystifying economic principles for Gen Z, which is also the focus of her book, In This Economy, How Money and Markets Really Work. She is Gen Z. Kyla, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's go to the first broad topic that we're talking about, which has to do with Social Security. Social Security is 23% of the federal budget. By far, it's the largest single item. 70 million people rely on a check in the mail from the Social Security Administration. For about almost 40% of recipients of Social Security, it's their primary income. It's 3/4 of their income, but it's going to run out of money soon in the early 2030s. And when that happens, if nothing changes, Social Security benefits will be cut between 20 to 24%. Social Security is paid for by payroll taxes that amount to 12.4% of every dollar of income people make up until about $176,000. According to the Supreme Court, you have no right to Social Security. The government has every right to say, we will collect this tax, but we don't have to pay you, according to a 1960 Supreme Court ruling. My question is, what does all of this mean for the generations who are working now? Millennials, Gen Z, people who are building up their careers and seeing 12.4% of every paycheck go to a Social Security system that may not be around when they retire. Are grandma's Social Security benefits imperiling Junior's future? And I want to take it to you first, Kyla. Do you agree with that? Do you feel that Social Security as a program is kind of immiserating younger workers to pay for older people, and younger workers may not even end up getting that?
I don't know if it's grandma's fault. I wouldn't frame it that way. I think it's more...
It was my grandma's fault.
Yeah, exactly yours. No, I think it's more of a structural problem. So if we think about what needs to be done with Social Security in order to make it solvent and to make it sustainable, we have to expand the population of workers. And the way that that gets done is by, having more children or allowing more immigration, just allowing a larger workforce. The United States has really bottlenecked its population. And that's sort of the issue with Social Security.
Although we're doing better than most advanced economies in terms of population growth.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that Social Security is still not a problem, right? Comparatively, yes, it's good, but there's still a root issue here.
Should everybody, everybody who paid into the system get something from it, even if they don't need it?
I think that would be the most fair thing, yeah.
Joe, what do you think?
Couldn't disagree more.
Okay, couldn't disagree more about what?
Well, first of all, I shouldn't be getting Social Security. I make enough money. Why am I getting Social Security? I mean, it's nice. I'm happy to have it. People of my generation, they have, and my parents' generation especially, they always had this view that you're putting this money in and you're going to get it out at the other end. And it's basically, it's your money. And of course, that's not true. It maybe never has been true, but it's certainly not true now. Now it's the younger generation's money that it's coming out on the other end. So number one, it should be means tested. But if you mean test it, then you have this sort of uprising of people who saying, oh, Social Security has just become welfare for old people. And it's kind of untenable. I would also disagree with one thing that you said. Social Security is not the biggest item in the budget. The debt is.
And the interest payments on debt?
Yeah.
Well,
the interest
what do you
payments
mean by
debt.
that? The debt service?
Well,
or just the debt as
what is
as
it
an
up to now?
iceberg looming
It's now
on?
up to 30.
It's the size of the defense budget.
Yeah, 37,
It's
38 trillion dollars.
30
Past the defense
plus
budget.
30 trillion plus.
Right.
And that's because interest rates are so high right now, right?
But even if they went down, I mean,
yeah, it's still substantial. I
mean, to me, the iceberg is not Social Security.
Right.
It's the looming debt.
I guess here's my question to you. And you have a 15-year-old son, right? And
Correct.
as well as a bunch of other kids.
By the way, who also gets Social Security.
And why is that?
Oh, you're going to enjoy this, Nick,
Yeah, okay.
yourself, because I know you're having a child soon.
Yep.
If you're eligible for Social Security and you have a child who's under 18 years old, that child gets a portion of Social Security in addition to your own until he turns 18 years old.
So you're drawing Social Security even as you continue to work.
I draw Social Security, also draw Medicare, which is another thing I shouldn't be getting. And my son gets a check that's half my check for him.
Is that ripping off younger workers?
Absolutely, without question.
Should we scrap that system and come up with, an income, assistance program for people who need money, but not based on age or anything like that?
So much of Social Security is built around the idea that the elderly don't have any money. They don't have. It's kind of it's a backup retirement plan, and especially in the age of 401ks where nobody knows how to do it, including me. People are not mentally wired to be good investors. They suck at investing. And so many people, they retire without enough money, so the Social Security is really meaningful for them, but I'm not one of those people. And I do think that Social Security and Medicare should be means tested. And that would take a lot of people off the rolls who don't need it. But again, as I said, there would be an uprising. I mean,
Stacey, what do you think about that?
I mean, so Joe, you might not need Social Security, but I would argue that Social Security needs you, because financially speaking, what you're saying is totally right, but politically speaking, the only way that Social Security benefits are protected is that they go to everybody. I think the second you put earning or money in the mix, the second it gets
So
cut.
but then what do you do in 2030 when it runs out of money?
Well, I mean, we could sustain it, but you're right. I mean, in 1960, I think there were 5 workers for every retiree. Now there are fewer than 3, and this is a huge issue.
So we can't afford it under the way that it's structured.
We have to cut it or
Can
something.
can I ask, would you say, because this is one of the canards about Social Security, if it's not a universal program, Americans who give more money away than any other people on the planet to charity, they're going to say, you know what, if I'm not getting it, would you say let them starve because Social Security is not universal?
Absolutely not. But it makes it politically vulnerable if the second you put income in the mix. And the reason Social Security is so protected is that everybody gets it. And I think the second you take that away, it makes the most vulnerable people who really do need it.
The proof of that is Medicaid. The proof of that is Medicaid,
Yes, exactly.
which not everybody does get, and which is constantly being on the chopping block in Congress.
But it also consistently grows, the amount of money that we end up spending, and even the recent proposed cuts are still, over time, we'll be spending more on Medicaid per patient beyond things.
Well,
this opens up an interesting dynamic where you have the boomer saying, you know what, get rid of Social Security, and a couple of younger people saying, well, I'm not so sure. I want to ask real quick, you haven't retired. Do you, and we'll start with you, Stacey, because you're closer to retirement than Kyla, but do you look forward to retiring, or do you envision a world where you're just working until you die?
I have saved for retirement. I am saving for retirement because I report on business and economic. As far as planning to retire, I don't really think so. I think the concept of retirement has changed enormously. Yeah. I think even in the last just 10 years.
Oh, in the last 10 minutes.
In the last 10 minutes. Also because the nature of work has changed. Right. Work used to be much more physical. For a lot of people, but for knowledge workers like Joe, you can keep working. In fact, you could arguably get better and better and better and better at your job. And I also think just advances in health and things like that. People being 80 or 90 is not what it used to be at all. So I don't really plan to retire. I like my work, but I hope the nature of it will change and, my schedule will change. I have to return to office. I hope I'm not going to the office 5 days a week when I'm 80.
Nobody's doing that now, right? Why would we ever do that in the future? Kyla, do you think about retirement?
Not really. Yeah, it's I'm 28, so it's kind of far away. But I think that I think about what it might look like. I think Stacey's point about the future of work is really true, and I worry a bit about the social safety net for retirees. To the point earlier, 43% of boomers have no retirement savings, and so I kind of think about it structurally. How are we going to even possibly retire our population in the future? Is that going to be accessible for anybody? So I think I worry about it more than I think about it for myself.
Well, this is where old 70s movies like Soylent Green come into play, right, Joe? They offered a way of learning how to retire people at a particular age. Yes. Well, look it up later.
It's made of people.
We're gonna move
I've spoiled
on.
it.
I just want to say one quick thing.
Yes.
My wife actually is very conscious about wanting to retire. She runs her own little PR shop. And
how old is she?
57.
Okay.
She says to me directly, I don't want to be doing at 73 what you're doing. I want to be retired. I want to be able to enjoy myself. I want to be able to travel, et cetera, et cetera. And she saves, she's doing everything right. Mm-hmm. So she is not part of the 43%, but then she's not a boomer either. She's
She'd be Gen X. So. Before we dig into the meat and potatoes of our conversation about money and the American dream, home ownership, things like that, Joe, are you where you thought you would be today in terms of work, economics, things like that?
Yes, I am. Okay. No, I've been really lucky. I always wanted to be a journalist. I always knew being a journalist meant I would never be a millionaire. I would, that I would live a good middle-class life. I also knew, I've known for at least 20 years that I did such a crappy job of my 401k and retirement that I was never going to be able to retire. So here I am, 73, I'm working, and I do think often about people who are not so lucky but have also pissed away their 401ks for various reasons, and don't have the joy that I have at work.
What year were you born?
1952.
Do you think you're a typical baby boomer?
No.
No.
I don't.
Okay. Stacey, are you where you thought you would be today?
I would say work-wise, it depends on when you would ask me in the past. It was after college that I realized I wanted to go into journalism. I've always loved it. I still love it, but it is a profession that's been in tumult, a lot of tumult. And there's a lot of luck involved in being able to navigate
Any
that.
talent in that, though, or are you just lucky?
I like to think there is a lot of talent involved in that, too. But I also think there's luck.
We both know a lot of people who've been laid off.
Yeah, really excellent,
who've had to find other ways to make a living.
Yes.
Well, one of the hallmarks early on of Gen X, they were slagged as slackers at the beginning of the Gen X era, but then it was also we will make it ourselves. We are DIY. We don't believe in gods. Are you representative of Gen X, do you think?
Yes and no. I think the part of Gen X that I really relate to, that I see a shift in with my younger colleagues, is I very much have this belief in the work system, like of this inherent fairness. Like if you put the work in, if you show up, if you do the work, it will pay off. Yeah. You will rise through the ranks. And I've seen that that's not always true, but it feels, I still sort of very much believe in that.
All right, Kyla, are you where you expected to be?
No. Well, I mean, I graduated in 2019 from college and I was working at a financial institution once I graduated, and I thought I'd always work in finance, but then the pandemic hit and I started making videos about the economy and turned this into a job and really started focusing on economics education, but I never thought I'd be where I am. So I feel very lucky in that regard. Right. But yeah, it's quite a surprise.
Does that feel like, is that a very Gen Z thing to do? I was working for a financial firm and then it's like, screw it, I'm gonna start doing TikTok videos?
I mean, I think the pandemic was a major disruptor for a lot of people. Like, I think a lot of people really questioned whether or not they wanted the jobs that they had and if that was the path that they wanted to go down. And there's so much optionality now with social media. So I think a lot of the younger generations, and really everybody, has been able to sort of test different paths and see what feels the best.
All right, let's move on to the next question. We are going to talk about housing, and a lot of people talk about an affordability crisis in things like grocery, eggs recently, college, healthcare, but especially housing. Many people these days feel like it is out of reach to ever own a house. You hear this again and again and again because prices are so high. Well, we're going to talk about whether or not that's actually true. And particularly our millennials and Gen Z uniquely screwed when it comes to home ownership. And here's a couple of facts to throw out. Buying rates among Gen Z and millennials have stagnated a bit, but they're actually doing quite well. Young people, generally speaking, across the board, are not spending more on housing than they did in the past. In certain areas they are, places like New York where we are, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Boston, housing has gone up. Home ownerships broadly have fluctuated since 1960 between about 62% to a high of 69%. They're a little bit down from that now. Gen Z, this is, and I guess I'll go to you again first, Kyla, just because we're talking about Gen Z. Gen Z is actually outperforming millennials, Gen Xers, and boomers in terms of home ownership rates. And more than a quarter of Gen Z people own their own homes. If that is true, why do we hear from so many younger people saying, like, owning a house is impossible, when younger people are doing better than their parents and in many cases their grandparents were at the same age?
Well, so they're getting help from their parents.
Okay.
That's kind of part of the home ownership rate. I think it's like 80% of Gen Zers who have bought a home have gotten help from their parents in purchasing that home. So you have a huge bifurcation in people who are able to purchase a house. Like, a lot of people are benefiting from, this great wealth transfer, $84 trillion going from the boomers to millennials and Gen Z, and they're able to buy a house with the help of their parents. But the people who are not able to buy a house, they're dealing with really high rents. They are dealing with rent being a larger percentage of their income. We're very supply constrained in the US. We don't build a lot of housing. And so younger people are really facing that uphill battle. And then for older people, they're locked in. It's too expensive to sell out of their house. I was just in New Hampshire last week at a housing conference and heard all about, sort of the problems that each generation is facing, and all of it's very complex.
Joe, do you think that home ownership is somehow central to this American dream that we've all heard about our entire lives?
I do.
In what way?
Well, first
do
of all,
do you rent or own?
I own. First of all, it's a psychological thing. Americans have been taught that home ownership is the cornerstone of the American dream. Certainly, when I was growing up, my parents, buying a house was so important. But of course, that was the same time as you're getting your first television, because televisions were just coming in then, and you were able to buy things on credit that you could never buy on credit before, et cetera. And so, that mentality, comes down to my generation, and the next, and the next, and the next. And, you know, the government itself, for many, many years, a lot through Fannie and Freddie, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, you know, promoted the idea of home ownership as central to the American dream.
How did that work out for us as a country?
Well, I actually think it worked out pretty well. I mean, we had the housing crisis in 2009, 2010, but a lot of that was because of scamming. People getting
because the government was subsidizing massive buying without showing any kind of, you know, income verification, right?
Well, we could have a long talk about that. Yeah. Whether it was the government or whether it was brokers.
Well, I guess though it was all in the service of the idea that, you know, a home ownership rate at 62% is not enough of the American dream. We've got to get it to 70%.
Right, and that it's 68%. I think, guys, is the only statistic I actually have in my mind on this thing. I think 68% was the high point before it started to fall in the housing crisis. But even with the housing crisis, people still want to own a home. Now, I want to say one other thing about the Gen Z issue, which is I'm one of the few boomers who was in favor of the student loan, what Biden wanted to do, forgive percentage of student loans. Because I think one of the things that has made it hard for younger people to buy is to make the down payment. The reason they can't make the down payment is because they have so many other debt obligations, and student loans is probably the biggest one. The student loan system really needs to be completely overhauled, which is a subject for another day, I realize. But I just wanted to say that I do think the problem, a lot of the problem for Gen Zers who don't have parents who can help them make a down payment is that they just don't have the capital.
Let me go to you, Stacey, as a Gen Xer, and I'm hoping you're going to be outside the box and you're going to be like, you know what, owning, you know, when you own a house, you're owned by the house. Let's rent, baby, and be more mobile, and we're going to be changing. We're changing our jobs. We're changing where we live every few years. Do you own or do you rent?
I rent.
Okay. And are you an ideological renter? I've owned, in my long lifetime, I've owned 4 houses. I've made money, I think, on 3 of them. Took a bath on 1, but like, I hope I never own a house again. Partly because you get locked into a location. You get and if you take the money you would use on a down payment and throw it in a mutual fund a little bit at a time, you're going to do better on average over time than, you know, with a house. But do you feel like you're not living the American dream because of renting?
Well, I guess there is a gap between my words and my actions on this topic, because when I started reporting, it was when I really started in this profession, it was the housing crisis. And so a lot of the first interviews I did were on people who were underwater or losing their homes. And that really imprinted on me. And I've been terrified of owning property ever since then. So I invested in other ways. However, I agree with Joe that it is I think historically speaking, a really good investment. It's a good investment, protects you against inflation. It can protect you against volatile markets. It is a thing you have a piece of the country. Also, it integrates you into a community in a way, it's more than the sum of its parts, I think, being a homeowner. And it's just, traditionally speaking, been the way to build wealth, the way to advance your family's financial standing has been to buy a house. It's been such a solid investment. Well, now is a tricky time, though.
Okay, and you know, just to kind of put it in perspective, if you look overall over time, and in most markets, not New York, not LA, and things like that, if you look at housing appreciation, it's not better than the stock market. So, and we also didn't have, in the past, it was very hard to buy even mutual funds, much less stocks. You can, you know, in your 20s, you can start throwing in $10, $25 a paycheck into an index fund.
Yeah, but you can't live in the stock market.
No, you don't have to. But the money you're saving is going away, and then
the money you pay in rent, you're just pissing it away. It's just, you might as well just throw it out the window.
But then you can move. What happens
when you tells me exactly
when you live in a city where the economy tanks, and if you have a house, it's harder to leave, right? It's harder to start new. It's harder to go west, young man. Kyla, am I wrong in suggesting this? And do you rent or own?
I'm a renter. Yeah, okay. I'm a renter. I have no clear path toward buying a house. I think so I'm from Kentucky, and even the home that I grew up in has appreciated like 5x in this like little suburb outside Louisville. And I look at that and I'm like, that's just so far away. And so I still.
Over what period of time?
It's been about 30 years.
Okay. What if you took the equivalent of the down payment? I realize I'm asking you to do math on the fly, but I don't know, if you took $10,000, put it in an index fund for the total stock market, would it be more or less than that?
It would be more. So John Burns' research, he is a great guy who studies the housing market. He's done a lot of studies on this, like if you bought a house, what would you make versus what you invested the S&P. And so I think a lot of people, because of the optionality of renting, and then also because of the accessibility of apps like Robinhood, they're like, okay, I'm just going to put the money in Robinhood rather than buy a house. And so I think a lot of people are making that decision, but I think a lot of people still want to own homes. Yeah, that's the number one thing that I hear.
And it's nice to own because you can do whatever you want with
it. But you build equity.
The other thing is people who put their money in Robinhood, do they actually know what they're doing? I mean, come on.
But it doesn't have to be Robinhood. It could be Vanguard. Okay. It could be Fidelity.
I know, but that's not the psychology of. Warren Buffett can do it, but you and I cannot.
No, but I'm not picking stocks. I'm just saying I'm betting the stock market is going to be better in 10 years than dollars are right now.
So it's interesting because the way that we're talking about housing is both a speculative asset where we expect it to appreciate, which is also the root cause of the housing crisis, is people think their homes should go up 4x.
Every year.
And it maybe shouldn't. Right. Maybe we should have enough supply where home prices are stable. And so I think in this country we have an issue where it's both a speculative asset and a place to live, and we're realizing that that's irreconcilable.
It's also very emotional, though, too, I would say, much more so than an index fund. I feel like there is something
I sure hope so. That I tear up thinking about where I was born. I don't tear up when I check my Vanguard account.
Yeah, I feel like it's an asset that is very old, has deep roots, and that can sound a little strange or sentimental, but I think there's actually quite a bit of value in just that aspect of it. I mean, we see this with gold, we see this with other things. There are certain investments that are a little bit more than the sum of their parts. I think housing's one of them.
Do you expect to either give pass money on to your kids to help them buy a house, or would you get help, or could you get help? I guess what I'm getting at is this question of one of the things, generationally speaking, there are always haves and have-nots, right?
Yeah.
And, when you have a friend whose parents give them a couple of $100,000 or something for a housing down payment, it's like, I wish I had that, but you don't. I mean, I guess my question is, how do we deal with that from a generational standpoint? The fact that, people based on accidents of birth have much more access to capital in order to buy a house or not?
Well, that is a very old story. About as old as it gets.
This is like Cain and Abel. I guess they have the same equity.
It's true. I think this is a great question, and the really interesting part about the housing market is it's getting more and more inaccessible to buy your first home. I think it used to be quite easy to get in, well, not quite easy, but it was something that was accessible. I mean, you look at The Simpsons, right? Mm-hmm. Homer Simpson works a job at a factory and can own a home.
It's a nuclear plant. It's an incredibly well-paying job.
That's true.
In a dying industry, maybe a new industry.
But that is getting further and further out of reach.
Is it when you get outside of big cities? I mean, is it that Gen Z is like, I'm pissed because I can't buy a brownstone in Brooklyn, and it's like you shouldn't be. You should be looking at Harrisburg. Or York,
the median home price has skyrocketed.
But private equity is buying up all those homes and renting them.
No, they're not. What's the percentage that of all private homes that private equity companies? It's growing all the time, but what is it?
Enough. I blame private equity for every.
Well, the median home price has gone from $140,000 in the year 2000 to $422,000.
Right.
And $400,000, that is a lot.
It's a huge amount of money.
So then it gets harder to get in on the ground floor. The stakes seem higher, so you're more hesitant to invest, and you're not sure if values are going to go up. This is the worst housing market this year since 1995.
But maybe this is a reason to start saying the American dream is being able to move west to be on the road like Jack Kerouac, not owning a home that you live and die in and pass on to your kids?
I'm from Idaho,
Yeah.
and my parents live there, and the Idaho housing market has gone insane
Bananas.
since the pandemic.
But you're
so
from Idaho. You left Idaho.
I did leave
right?
Idaho.
So if you had a house there, you might not leave, right?
Don't give my parents any ideas. Yeah, possibly so. I mean, it does
Yeah.
give you roots in a place.
I guess, just as a kind of final question for this, I think one thing we would all agree on is we don't build enough housing. Why? How do we build more housing? What's the quick answer to do that?
Didn't Ezra Klein write a whole big book about this?
Abundance, yeah.
Abundance.
It's rezoning, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just really is a will to build more housing. I mean, but there's so much resistance in neighborhoods and suburbs.
NIMBYism.
And it's just NIMBYism is just a powerful.
But it seems like
force.
we're coming to that era is coming to an end of really exclusive zoning for single family dwellings that have to be detached, that have to have a minimum lot size. Kyla, is there a way to build more housing easily?
Yeah, I mean, rezoning is kind of the first step, but it's actually really challenging because the water and sewer infrastructure that we have also has to be expanded. So it's like everything has to be redone in order to build more housing. And the other solution would be to build upwards, but the NIMBYs don't necessarily like that.
Yeah.
So the quick and easy solution is rezoning, but there's challenges along the way with that.
We have so far talked about Social Security and we've talked about home ownership. And I think we're surfacing some interesting differences of kind of values or starting points or just vantage points across the generations. Now I want to get into something else that I've been noticing, I think we all have been, which is kind of a fascinating nostalgia for the 1950s. You can see it in a very popular aesthetic online with things like the rise of trad wives as well as memes where there will be a woman in a big skirt, a kind of June Cleaver kind of housewife who is splayed out on the ground with a mountain of groceries, and the caption will say, in the 1950s, a single husband, working 40 hours a week could feed his 15 children. And his wife didn't have to work. There's a concept called cottagecore where people are looking back at this beautiful moment. The phrase "Make America Great Again" is nostalgic, right? It was Donald Trump rose to power in 2016, saying he was going to make America great again, looking towards the past. There's part of that is an appeal for the perceived economic situation of the era. During the 1950s, there was rapid and sustained wage growth across the board. People started moving into houses. They left cities, actually, that had been building up since the late 19th century. There were things like the interstate highway system. America could do something and people were more mobile. There was a flood of new consumer items that made being a housewife or taking care of a house less of a hassle. Gasoline, lawnmowers for the men, dishwashers, better refrigerators and things like that for the women. There was also, of course, a racial segregation, gender segregation. If you had an alternative sexuality, just keep shut about it. I want to kind of set all of that up just to ask you, is the 1950s, is it a golden age that we need to get back to, or is the feeling for that just a misplaced nostalgia for an era that never existed? And I guess let's start with you, Stacey.
It's a really interesting question. I mean, I would say, as you did, it's really important to separate what was happening socially to what was happening economically. I mean, socially, like you said, it was a time of segregation. Kyla and I would not have been able to have a bank account or own property. So am I nostalgic for that? No. But there was much less income inequality. You could have a job without a million qualifications and you could do well. You could support your family. And I think that aspect of the American dream is really important. Also, it was a time where the US was really opening up to the world. After the Second World War, free trade started, there was this idea that if we traded with other countries, we wouldn't go to war with them. And so this era of free trade and that kind of progress really started. It was also a time when the US, like the dollar, became this important currency around the world for international trade.
The reserve currency. Yeah.
The reserve currency. So I think it was a moment where the US was starting to step onto the world stage in a different way. And the economy was really getting going. And like you said, all these technological advancements that people were seeing in their everyday lives. I understand that nostalgia.
Yeah. Joe, the 1950s, was the economy and the stuff of everyday life different and better?
Yeah, but the key thing people leave out when they talk about the 50s is that we were the last man standing after the war. We had no competition. So why were wages going up steadily, even though the unions were at their peak? The answer is because there was no Japanese worker competing, no Chinese worker competing, no German worker competing. There was nothing. And it wasn't until the Japanese cars started to come in the 1980s, late 70s, early 80s, that people started to wake up, oh, there's a problem here. It was an easy time economically for America because we had the steel factories, we had the auto factories, we had the ability to manufacture, which free trade did a lot to damage ultimately. And yeah, you absolutely could have a factory job, raise a kid, children, and pay for your mortgage and have a car and maybe even 2 cars on one salary. What really happened was competition from overseas changed the American economy and made us vulnerable in ways that we hadn't been in the 50s and 60s.
It made us better, right? In terms of economic efficiency, the amount of stuff we produce continues to go up, whether we have more or less people working factory jobs.
Yes and no. I mean, there was a lot. The other point I wanted to make about this is we've become a very economically selfish country. So David Zaslav, makes $500 million for driving Warner Brothers Discovery into the ground. He's a selfish man.
How does that pick your pocket?
It has to do with income inequality. It has to do with income. The ratio between what the CEO made and the worker made back in the 60s was 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, and now it's 500-to-1 or something. That does matter. That does matter.
How does it matter? Is it a psychological thing? Because there's no question that the CEO class in 1960 was living much better than a working class person was.
But not so much better that they were in gilded castles. That the workers didn't feel like they were being screwed by the CEO.
But it's feeling, right? Because, upper class people in 1970 had fewer things than poor people had in 2000.
It's feeling, but it's also, we'll take care of you. If business goes down, we're not going to lay you off. We'll take care of you. We may send you to Montana or various places across the country, but there was a sense of back and forth loyalty. Even the auto workers who went on strike a lot.
Yeah.
Went on strike a lot, but then they would get their money and everybody would be happy. And
okay, then I want to go to Kyla, but those cars though that they were producing were terrible. Right? I mean, the reason why cheap Japanese imports, were chosen, or the Volkswagen Beetle, which was really the kind of first cheap import, it's because it was a better car, right, than what you were getting out of Detroit. The automakers and the auto workers were doing great, but the people who had to drive the cars were like...
You're absolutely right. They got fat and happy.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. And they needed the competition. But in the process, and I blame Carl Icahn and Boone Pickens and people like that for doing this, in the process, the CEO became, do you remember, what's his name? Chainsaw Al? Do you remember Chainsaw Al?
Yeah, Al Dunlop.
Chainsaw Al. He was the first CEO who was proud to say, I lay off my workers. I kick them out of work. Aren't I great? Shouldn't I get $15 million a year?
But that's partly because he was selling off unproductive parts of a business, and then that money and those workers ended up going somewhere else. They didn't starve.
Maybe
right?
they did, maybe they didn't.
Yeah. Kyla, when you think about the 1950s, do you find like that vision of kind of a life where everybody's happy, one person is working? How does the 50s grab you as an era?
My grandparents immigrated from Ireland in the 1950s, and both of them worked. Like, my grandma worked nights and my grandpa worked days. And so, like, that's the full context I have of the 1950s, is that it was not this, like, perfect time that I think the trad wives and cottagecore can portray. Like, it was really tough for a lot of people. But I get the nostalgia. Like, I think right now what we're seeing in a lot of people is they're trying to find something to hold on to. And it seems like the way that the 1950s is ultimately portrayed, like as Stacey said, as Joe said, was this time where, like, America was on the up and up. And right now, America's not. America's having a tough time right now.
How do we say that, though? Because median household income, median personal income is, but in America, like, family household income is higher than it's ever been.
Yeah.
In real inflation-adjusted terms.
Sure.
But we're not on the up and up.
Yeah, no, so on the world stage, right?
Okay.
So the way I was talking about it is, I think people, like, envisioned the US back then, rightly so, as, like, the number one superpower. And I think right now the US is sort of, fighting for that number one spot, yeah.
What gets left out of the nostalgia, of course, the Cold War was really going into high gear.
McCarthy.
Yeah, I mean, we look back on it and we say, oh, that was a placid time. But if you go back and you read books like Why Johnny Can't Read, the birth of juvenile delinquency as a concept and as a brutal reality, the end of cities, because God forbid Puerto Ricans moved into New York. The civil rights movement was seen as unbelievably disruptive to the status quo, which it was. When you go back and look at that, there's this pervasive anxiety. The decade ends with Betty Friedan writing The Feminine Mystique, comparing being a housewife, a suburban housewife, to being in a comfortable concentration camp. Is there a way that we can go back to the 50s and pull meaningful, positive things from that without kind of saying, okay, and we have to sign on to the conformity that also seemed to define the era as well? Can you, and I guess a roundabout way of saying, can you have economic and cultural creative destruction that doesn't drive people insane? Right, Joe?
I think religion is an important part of it. That we've lost so much of our belief in God, and there seems to be a revival of that in the country.
But what's interesting about that is Bible sales are up, but church attendance is down. So it's almost like the performance of religion, which is kind of that's sort of an interesting reflection of the era too. Like, there's a lot of performativity right now, and I think there's a lot of performativity in nostalgia, right?
Mm-hmm. I think what I'm really trying to get at is we need to regain a sense of community, and that is super helpful. That's not the 50s all over again, but it's something that we've lost that we could regain.
Right.
Isn't that the whole history of the US, though? I mean, it coming apart, coming together, coming apart. I mean, I feel like that's almost in our DNA as a country, that there's this sort of inherent cultural disruption, and then we kind of cobble things together, and then there's another disruption. I mean, there's a huge social division in our country right now, but
right.
As you mentioned, like, historically speaking, back in the 50s, there were also divisions. Like, I don't know, that just feels like a cycle that our country goes through again and again.
Would you go back to the 1950s as you imagine it?
No.
No? What about you, Kyla?
No, it's like, as a woman, like, there wasn't much I could do.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be in this room, that's for sure, you know?
What about you, Stacey?
No, I think I wouldn't be here. I would maybe be on a lawn in a dress with groceries somewhere, but that doesn't sound so appealing right now.
We're going to wrap up this conversation over the next couple minutes, and I guess one of the things that I want to ask is, first off, is generational hostility real? And, if it is, does it make sense? Is Gen Z and maybe millennials, are they right to be angry at Xers and boomers? Stacey, what do you think?
I think generational hostility is definitely real and happening, and I don't think it's unjustified.
How is it different as as a Gen Xer? Are you looking at boomers and you're like, these guys aren't doing anything, or is it more Gen Z, like, hey, show up?
I mean, I just think there are a lot of different expectations around work. I mean, a lot of Gen Z and younger millennials came into the workforce or were very early in the workforce when the pandemic happened. And there was a brief moment of a couple years when workers had more power than companies, where people were getting big raises and able to jump around in jobs, and it was a great moment to be a worker. And if you come into the workforce and you're shaped by that, then when that starts to go away, as it has now, I think that can create it's a much different feeling than it is for me. Most of my time in the workforce has been shaped by feeling like the company I was working for had the upper hand.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a different mindset. And so I will sometimes feel like younger workers have a much greater sense of their value in a workplace, feel entitled to things earlier than I would have. And it can create some resentment. I also am a little jealous of it too. I'm like, why wasn't I pushing for that when I was that age? But I think it does create generational tension. For sure.
Joe, did you have moments, we obviously all do, but the boomers famously told their parents, who had survived the Depression and saved money and, won World War II, and then the boomers said, screw you, Mom and Dad, we're not going to do what you wanted us to do. Did you ever have moments of generational hostility, or are you always a kind of nice, go along, get along kind of
My mother wanted me to be a postal carrier. Because security, you need security. If you go off and be a journalist, you'll never have security.
And she's not wrong, but she is wrong in your case.
Right. So I did not become a letter carrier. And it's just, there really wasn't a lot of political tension because, she had to raise 8 other kids. She didn't really have time to worry about me.
Kyla, how do you think about this generational issue? And I guess you are a free agent, so you are kind of designing your own thing rather than attaching yourself to a larger organization. Do you sense hostility from older people, or are you like, if I can only get rid of the Joe Nassaras in the world, I can move up the masthead?
Oh, honestly, I don't have that radar. People could be mad at me, and I truly have no idea. But I think, so I did work at an organization for a year and a half, and I didn't notice too much hostility. There was a lot of focus on mentorship. But then I've been on the road for the past year and a half with my book, and have had the opportunity to go to a lot of college campuses, to go to a ton of conferences. And I do hear a little bit of generational hostility, mostly from younger people toward the boomers, primarily because of what we were talking about a bit earlier, where it's Social Security payments, a little bit of hostility around the housing market. And I think that hostility is not necessarily because of boomers, it's more of the structural part of what boomers are taking place in, where it's okay, so boomers do block a lot of housing, so does Gen X. And there is sort of issues with career ladders and advancement in careers. Now the entry-level labor force, a lot of CEOs are trying to replace this, people that age with AI. So I think there's a lot of anger at older people because of that. So I do see pockets of it, yeah, for sure.
And do you think is most of that misplaced in the sense of if you're 25 and you're mad that somebody who's 65 has a lot of money, it's kind of they spent 40 years working for it. But then there are these other issues that kind of get in the way of, this, and Joe, you and I are both guilty of this, of, we should be retired, right, or near retired, but we're still there.
We are impeding somebody. I mean, I always saw this in large corporations when I was at Time Inc. and also at Bloomberg, where, a younger person feels like, I am ready to do this person's job, but that person isn't ready to leave.
Right.
What do I do? I'm blocked. So I've seen that kind of hostility for sure.
And you worked at Time Life, right?
Yeah, I was at Fortune magazine. Yeah.
Did they have mandatory retirement ages at any point when you were working there?
I think they did.
Yeah. And then, and also, where is Time now?
Time Inc. doesn't exist anymore, which is pretty sad, but
it's also the way of the world, right?
They did it to themselves.
It fertilizes the next generation of new media startups, right?
It's true, but I remember so distinctly that when I was at Fortune, the internet was coming in, and we wound up being bought by AOL. They rolled their eyes at the internet. They rolled their eyes. By the time they figured out that they needed to jump on board the internet the moment it passed.
Right.
They have so much invested in the old way too.
Totally.
You know, I think it's like that is always the tension.
People got upset when they stopped rolling the cart of booze down at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
There was a cart of
You're going to
booze
stoke
at
a lot of
5 o'clock.
generational hostility. It's like that you
Or
got to work
generational
out of place.
jealousy.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Like
absolutely.
a cart of booze at
As a
5
final,
p.m.
we're going to wrap things up. As a final, just quick answer to this: which generation is the most screwed? Stacy?
Okay, maybe millennials.
Okay, why?
Because just the time that they're hitting, this should be their prime working moment.
Mm-hmm.
The job market is really frozen. It's a really tough time to move, and this should be a prime moment for millennials to be building wealth.
Yeah.
And the housing market is also frozen. So they're just blocked in a lot of ways. I think it's really hard to maneuver, and these things, they compound over time.
So they're the Jan Brady of generations,
They're the
right?
Jan Brady of
Which
generations.
you may not understand, Kyla, but I think the rest. Kyla, which generation do you think is most screwed?
I'm a little worried about the alphas, which are the generation younger than the Zs. We use the Zs, the Zoomers, as like a experimentation with short form media, and I think the alphas are going to be an experimentation with AI, and I'm a bit worried that they're going to try to go to college or get a job, and companies are going to be like, we have AI now, and we have no clear policy response yet for that. I worry about their brains, I worry about the phone addiction, and then I just worry about what their career paths are going to look like, and just the lack of clear response right now.
Do you think, will AI be the first technology that actually decreases the total number of jobs in an economy?
That's their goal, the companies, the labs, that's their goal.
And that the larger economic growth powered by AI won't end up creating new jobs that we can't even really fully think of.
I mean, in the automation part of it, people are like, people can do robot maintenance, and that's going to be really cool. And it's just like, I don't know. Gen
Alpha will be working the tiny screws on the iPhones, right? That Howard Lutnick was
that's
talking
Lutnick's
about.
goal.
And
Amazon can evolve.
Amazon just announced that they were going to replace, or they were going to use robots instead of hiring 300,000 new workers.
Yeah, and your point, Stacey, the economy can evolve, but it always does.
There's a painful.
Nails used to be like 0.5% of GDP in the 1800s, like hammer and nails. Yeah, and so the economy has always changed and it's always shifted. But this technology, the way that the labs are designing it, is so all-encompassing that I think they're trying to get into every pocket of potential job, that could be.
So
we could pivot to.
This is more than like the Industrial Revolution. This might be.
It could
you
be.
think it could
Yeah,
be? Because in the Industrial Revolution too, so many jobs were factory jobs. A lot of those got replaced, but they evolved into new jobs, which they couldn't have imagined.
Industrial jobs as a percentage of the workforce peaked in the 1940s. Joe, final word, which generation is most screwed?
Well, first of all, I think Gen Z has shown itself already to be quite nimble,
Very resilient.
and they're the generation I worry least about. I agree, millennials, of which my daughter is one, are having the toughest time. They're blocked from the high-paying jobs because the boomers won't quit. But
won't they live longer too? I mean, or can we think about things in fluid terms rather than zero sum?
I would hope you're right. I mean, I think part of the problem with part of the problem in general with theorizing about what the future is that we do tend to lock it in to the way we think now. Mm-hmm. So I hope you're right.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to end it there. That's a wrap on this conversation. I'm Nick Gillespie. This is Open to Debate, and I want to thank my guests for joining me today. That's Joe Nocera, Kyla Scanlon, and Stacey Vanek-Smith. Thank you for listening to Open to Debate. This episode was made possible thanks to a generous gift from Liberty Ears Foundation. Our work is also made possible by listeners like you, the Rosencrantz Foundation, and supporters of Open to Debate. Robert Rosencrantz is our chairman. Our CEO is Clay O'Connor. Leah Matthau is our chief content officer. And I'm Nick Gillespie. We'll see you next time on Open to Debate.